going on, guys? Matt at Middleton Motorsports here. Another behind the tune video coming at you. 2022 GT500 up on the dyno today. So I'm going to flip the camera on. We'll go walk up on the deck here and take a look at this. So this is a customer of ours. He's had a couple cars through here that we've modified for him. He is definitely a road racer. That's what he enjoys doing with this car. And he did buy this car completely stock from us, from Middleton Ford here. And he brought it back this year to do our 800R package. So the 800R package is gets into some bolt-ons here on these GT500s. So I'll walk up here and we'll take a look. So JLT Cold Air, we definitely do that. That's our favorite intake manifold. It does have the VMP Predator lid and cooler, the race cooler. It's got a set of 2-inch long tube headers on it, American Racing headers, and the 3-inch American Racing X pipe with the silencers, and those are hooked to the stock mufflers. The R package that we do on these cars is a bunch of suspension goodies. We kind of dig into the BMR catalog quite a bit. We do radius rod bushings in the front. We do all the arms in the rear. We do the toe links. We do the camber arms. We do the big rubber control arm, lower control arm bushing on these S550s. We do the spherical bearing there. We do the toe link bushings in the knuckles that Steeda/Ford Racing sells. We lock the cradle out. We lock the diff out with urethane. All that stuff combined helps these cars immensely on track with the steering feel, the road holding. Obviously, we also do, I should also mention, 2 caster camber plates, ground control caster camber plates, so we can dial in some camber. We like running, a little over 3 degrees of camber on these GT500s in the front and a little over 2 in the rear when we're running slicks. He does run slicks on this car, Hoosier R7s. So we spec our alignment settings for slicks. But as far as the power mods go, what we're looking at today on the dyno, that's basically, it's just a bolt-on package. We leave the stock pulley for guys that road race these cars, unless they're really trying to push stuff. I highly recommend just leaving the stock pulley. These things make plenty of horsepower. And the 800 package, we call it an 800 package because it makes 800 at the rear tires. So, and that's about the recipe that, pump gas. This is running on 93 octane. And this recipe right here is an easy 800 at the rear wheels on 93 octane. 91 octane, you're looking at more like a 780, but most people have access to 93 at some point. And so we kind of base our results of these bolt-ons on that 93 octane, 10% ethanol. So, like I said, cold air, lid, cooler, headers, and that's pretty much it. It's just basically external bolt-ons on this car. And we are increasing the power over 100 at the rear wheels. So move the screen here. We can take a look at where I'm at so far. I left up the most of the working runs here. I've done enough of these packages, this 800 package, where I can kind of throw a startup tune in it, and I really only have to do 3-4 pulls on these things to get these dialed in. Since this is pump gas, it still has the stock fuel system on it, stock injector, stock fuel rails. We're not getting too far into adjusting, fuel system stuff. I do obviously have to make some changes to the speed density model. These GT500s do not run a mass airflow sensor. They're just strictly speed density based. And so you get into the speed density model to adjust fueling. And the headers do change the fueling. I do have to add, between 3 and 6%, depending on, where in the RPM range. Typically in the mid-range where the headers, headers actually add a lot of scavenging effect of the exhaust to the engine in the mid-range primarily. Obviously they help flow up top, but they also, because of the long tubes merging into a collector, the exhaust pulses help pull low pressure into the other tubes as the cylinders are firing, and that scavenging effect really is amplified in the mid-ranges, between 4,000 and 6,000 RPM. So that's usually where I have to end up adding the most amount of fuel when we do long tube headers on these things. But pretty much across the board, I have to add fuel just the most in the mid-range. So yeah, you can see this is our 800 package, and we are at, just over 800 wheel. The first pull there was the red one. It was the timing I had adjusted a little bit. The next one I took a little bit too much out and added a little too much fuel on that blue. And then the green one was the one I just did. And you can see it's nice and smooth. I'm going to do one more here, obviously. We'll video that, and we'll take a look at the final results, and we'll take a look at the dyno graph. But so far, this is pretty typical of our 800 package. You know, again, just some external bolt-ons. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't take much to get these types of numbers out of these cars. Obviously, we are extending the factory RPM range quite a bit. Well, not quite a bit, but about 500-600 RPM. Typically, I'm revving these cars. I set the rev limiters at 8,400 on the stock boost level like we see with these. Since this does not have a ported blower, we are still seeing about stock boost levels. You know, we do pick up about a pound of boost going from 7,500 of the factory rev limiter up to the 8,400. We are picking up a pound of boost just revving it that little bit extra. But because I'm not adding a whole ton of boost to it, I'm still comfortable revving them pretty high. Now, once you start putting some pretty, higher boost numbers with ported blowers, you do have to be mindful of the stock valve springs. You do run into a limit of those when you start putting more boost pressure in the manifold, and subsequently in the head ports puts more pressure against the valves that wants to push the valves open, and you end up with valve control issues if you rev them too high with too much boost. So, but because again, we're on the stock pulley, we're seeing just over stock boost, I am comfortable with an 8,400 hard limiter. I set the transmission up in these cars to shift about right at 7,900 for road racing. I don't like going any higher than that for road racing, just for again, engine longevity and for oil temperature. So when we're really revving them high, everything is working a little harder. The oil pump's working harder to pump the oil. The VCT actuators are working harder. So I typically keep it just under 8,000, up from the 7,400. So I up the shift point about 500 RPM. But again, then you're getting into that little bit extra, a little bit extra horsepower you're making at the very top here. So instead of shifting right here, it's 7,500, we're shifting it up here just before 8. So you take advantage of that little extra power we make up here. Otherwise, this is, we're up stock. These cars typically on 93 octane will make 680 on average. Some are making 670 if maybe they're a little newer car with a tighter engine. I've seen as high as 690 out of a completely stock one. That's about as high as I've ever seen. So we are up over 100 at the rear wheels. I've dynoed lots and dozens of these things bone stock, and they all make between that number depending on the fuel. Really comes, the majority of that variance comes from if it's 91 octane or 93 octane. Again, because the HDFX system, timing system in these cars is floating and closed loop, it will add timing with better fuel automatically. So I'm gonna put the camera down. We're gonna spin one more pull up here. We'll take a look at the final numbers. Hopefully it's not too heat soaked. It's been sitting here for about 10 minutes with the fans off, so I'll kick the fans on, and the car should be still up to temperature as far as coolant and oil. And we'll look at our final number. I'll probably clear these runs off and just leave that 807 so we're not looking at a bunch stacked up because it gets a little busy on the screen. And then we'll look at the data log, and we will wrap this one up. Looks like it made just a smidge less up at the top, but we were about 10 degrees hotter on the manifold temperatures on that pole versus the red pole. So, yeah, just because it sat here and I had the fans turned off while I was getting the camera ready and stuff. And yeah, it was about 100 degrees on the blue pole, about 90 degrees of manifold temperature on the red pole. So just lost a little bit, but you can see the graphs are pretty much overlaying. Yeah, I'm not too worried about that. That's a 5 horsepower difference. At this power level is kind of just a variance of dyno and temperature. So because the graphs overlay so nicely, that's looking really good to me. Again, still over 800 wheel, still hitting that 615 torque, right about where we were. So yeah, that looks good. That's pretty typical for our 800 package, that dyno graph. Nice smooth curve. Real straight line, real broad power band. These obviously supercharged car, these, this style blower will make. So we'll take a look at the data log. Jump in the car here. All right, let me see if I can get the camera lined up. All right, so without too much glare. All right, so timing. So this is, since this is a pump gas, we're definitely gonna see a little bit of knot correction going on up and down versus like some of, if you've watched some of the other videos where I'm doing 85, typically I'll just kind of set the timing where it's gonna make peak power, and the HDFX system really, it won't do much on those cars. But because this is a pump gas car, obviously I'm not trying to throw a bunch of timing at it and then let the knock sensors pull it all out. Typically I'll try to run the borderline table about where it's going to be happy, and then if he's got a better tank of fuel, it might add a little bit. And you can see it did pull about a degree when I first rolled into it there, but it came back, and then even then some, it added half a degree at the top there. So this car, again, 93 octane on these cars with this bolt-on package with the stock pulley, you're into the low 20s for timing. 91 octane, you'll typically be 17 to 18 degrees, and that's where I talk that 20 horsepower difference between even a stock pull making 670 to 690, or this 800 package making a little over 800 or 780-ish. You know, I've even seen as low as 775 on some of the poor 91 we have around here, and some guys just choose to go to those fuel stations because it's easy, and the cars will still run okay on it. They just run a little less timing. I stay pretty cognizant on what type of fuel these guys, I typically will ask them, do you guys have 93 10% available, or are you 91 only? And I'll set the borderline tables up for that, because there is a difference these cars will make. But you can see the boost is really not much over stock. We're seeing probably, it's about 13 pounds. So that's pretty typical of what you're seeing here on, just a bolt-on car. The intake, the JLT and the extra RPM will give us a pound, maybe a smidge, maybe a little more than a pound of boost. But when we put the long tubes on and we eliminate the factory manifolds and, forward exhaust section, we free up the exhaust. So the engine becomes a little more efficient. The blower doesn't have to work as hard and doesn't have as much to push against because the engine is flowing more air because of the headers. And the boost will drop a little bit from freeing up the exhaust. So we kind of get a wash in that situation. We still end up with a little bit more boost than factory at the very tippy top there. You can see it starts to climb up. And so I'm referencing this pink line up here. That's the boost, that's the map sensor. And right at the tippy top, I took that run to about 8,200. I have the limiter set at 8,400. If he's in paddle mode, and this is pretty typical how I'll set these cars up, in paddle shift mode, it will allow up to 8,300 before it'll just shift for you. Versus if you're on the paddle and you can still shift it obviously, but instead of just nailing the rev limiter on the paddles, if you're in manual mode, it'll just shift. I really don't like bouncing these cars off the rev limiter at that type of RPM where it just wants to hit a hard cut and bounce. The GT500s have a more robust timing chain system and oil pump than a regular Coyote does, like a Gen 3 Coyote. But it's still not the greatest for the engine to be bouncing off a limiter, where it's cutting and stuttering off a limiter at 8,300 or 8,400 RPM. So I'll set them up so they just shift instead of hitting the limiter when you're in paddle mode. When you're in any of the automatic modes, it's just gonna shift at like 7950. So that's how I set these cars up, especially for these guys that are road racing them. So air-fuel ratio, I kind of follow the factory on the pump gas, bolt-on stuff. I kind of follow a little bit of the factory fueling strategy where you can run it a little bit leaner where the boost is a little bit lower in some of the lower RPM ranges. But once you get up past 5,000 RPM, I like putting a little bit more fuel in these things. Obviously, we're getting rid of the cat enrichment on the fueling strategy. And I'll typically target 0.79 lambda on gas and a 0.8 lambda on E85. I find on gasoline, 91 and 93, especially the 91, even 0.78 if it's strictly going to be a 91 car, because they will take a little more timing if they're rich like that. And the timing does make more of a difference than adding a smidge of fuel. Now, richening them up without adding timing will take some power away, but the fact that we can add maybe a degree more by putting, you know, a couple, you know, 7.8 versus 0.8 on pump gas, you can add a degree. The 5 or 8 horsepower you lose with the extra richness, you're going to gain back, and then some with an extra degree of timing. So this car I'm targeting 0.79 at the top here, so you can kind of see how the air fuel is leaner, and then it steps down right in here, right in that kind of low 5,000 area. It starts to step down by 5,500. I'm running that kind of 0.78, 0.79. You can see it's running. And again, these are closed loop, so I'll highlight that fuel trim there, and you can see as I'm scrolling across, pretty close on the fuel trims. It's right about zero. It's adding a smidge there, taking away, so it's real close. I like to try to nail these real close to zero. So you can see the short term is what the closed loop system is using under power enrichment to add and subtract fuel around the target lambda that I'm targeting. So there's in the tune here, there's obviously these power enrichment settings that this is going to be where the target is for the air fuel. So I kind of follow this type of strategy where the factory does this, where it's pretty lean down low, and then it gets really rich up top, which I find this is just going to kill power. That's part of having the cat enrichment strategy. There's also another cat enrichment strategy on top of that to add even more fuel that I basically eliminate. This is how I set it up. I find this is kind of the best fueling strategy. Other tuners, you know, obviously there's other popular GT500 and Coyote tuners out there. They may do it differently, but some of those other shops get really aggressive with these cars, and you're not going to be, if you get real aggressive on these tunes, you're not going to be road racing them and have them live. So, but anyway, this is how I set it up. I personally owned a GT500, a 20. I did a lot of testing with that car. Chuck, one of the owners of the dealership here, he and the manager of, you know, basically our overseer of everything here in motorsports, he had his Grabber Lime car. We did a ton of testing on that car. This guy and other customers, we all road race with these guys. They all come to our track days, and I have a ton of data at Road America, Blackhawk, Coda in Texas, Ozarks, a bunch of tracks around the country in these GT500s, and so I know where they'll be happy. They rip down the straightaways, they put up big top speeds, quick lap times. So this is how I do it. So yeah, this is looking really good. This is exactly where I wanted to see. I'm happy to be able to tune one of these on 93. We don't get a lot of them, but these guys have good 93 available. This car, you know, with the ability to run these low 20s, you know, 21 degrees of timing at the top end like that, that is nice to see on pump gas. A lot of times we don't have that luxury, and these guys are putting the 91 in them, and we're down 20 wheel from where we're at right with this one. But so this one is right where we want to be. I think that's pretty much it. You know, this is not the first one of these cars I've done videos on, so hopefully I'm answering any questions that you guys have on these cars. There is quite a bit of stuff I changed in these tunes. You can see the green highlighted tables and menus and PIDs, drop downs, everything that I change in these things to, there's a lot of stuff that I change on these cars when we do headers and cold air and the tuning like this. I changed the spark strategy quite a bit. Like I said, I have to change the speed density model. Typically in the mid ranges on the headers, I don't have to touch, but these 8, 9, 10, and 11, that's the map points is again how Ford kind of runs the different modes, that I should call them modes, that the engine will see depending on the cam angles and where the VCT is putting the cams, which changes the VE of the engine, which changes the timing requirement and the fueling requirement. So Ford has laid it out into like a map point. GT500, since they don't have IMRCs, they only run half the map points. Like a Mustang GT is going to run all the map points, and they take a little longer to tune, especially when you like ProCharge or ESS boost one or turbocharge one, and you still have an IMRC intake. It gets a little more complicated. These GT500s, because they're factory supercharged, only use the first 14 map points. So yeah, otherwise, you know, there's quite a bit of the stuff I do change, and obviously I'm not going to go over everything, and I'm not here to teach you guys how to tune these things. I just like kind of going over the overview of what we do and why we do it, and you know what type of mods gain what type of power. So, and then I like looking at data logs. I'm a nerd for data, and this car I'm obviously using HP tuners with. Some of these other cars, the fuel systems, flex fuel, I'm using PCM Tech, which I also really like that software. A little more complicated to use because they pretty much define everything that's in the PCM, versus HP tuners kind of defines what they think the things we just need, which I wish there was more, but that's what we have PCM Tech for. So yeah, that's going to do it for the dyno on this car. Probably go take it for a little test drive. Make sure everything is looking good on the trans shift points and the drivability. We'll take one more look at the dyno graphs here. So yeah, that's looking really good. And that'll wrap it up for the dyno in this one. So I appreciate you guys watching our channel, and take a look at our social medias too, Instagram and our website for more information on the MM packages. We also do, we do an 800 package. We also have some packages higher. My personal car was a 900 package that gets into a fuel system, fuel pumps, injectors, and a ported blower and a throttle body, and then we're well over 900 at the wheels. Still with the stock pulley. So if you guys want more information on those MM packages, just go to our Middleton Motorsports website, and we have all that information on there. So thanks for watching, guys, and we'll talk to you guys later.